And both of these rituals are passed down from the first century church. The first is the Lord's Supper. The Lord's Supper is one of the two ordinances or mandates that are kept because Jesus commanded that we observe them. Therefore, it is a heaven to earth ceremony, a sacrament. I love the solemn joy every worship day that surrounds the Lord's feast. I love the movement of the elders and the deacons. I love the astounding music that Tracy plays. I love the feeling that we gather, that we find ourselves in every time we come to the table. Every communion meditation brings us back to this table to remind us again and again that God, as revealed through Christ, offers welcome to everyone. Every time we get together, we take the bread and the cup, we celebrate that because of the loving act of Jesus Christ that led through death, each and every one of us, no matter who we are, what we look like, or whom we love, each and every one of us is welcome to be in the presence of Christ, who greets us at his table. We are a diverse people, not because we are so progressive, but because Jesus has made everyone welcome. The other ritual that I love is a bit less organized. It is a bit less structured. It is known as the passing of the peace. We check in on each other. In the Sunday service, there is about a 2-minute structured window, but it continues to take place during the life of the church, the announcements, and even during the prayer requests. In the Saturday service, the Lord's Feast, the prayer singing, the life of the church, talking back to the preacher, the passing of the peace never stops. Evangelism gets done too. Why join a choir? Well, I'll think about it. Start a preschool? Well, maybe. Let's talk about it. Who do we have to talk to? Does our church have a group that can do that? Let's get some coffee and talk about it. You are welcome. And off we go. I remember one Sunday morning during the passing of the peace, dear Annabelle Lee, who sat about 3/4 of the way back on that side, God bless her soul, came quickly down the side aisle on her cane. It was amazing how fast she could travel, and she had something to say. She came straight to me down in the front, and she said, "There are children in this service. You need a children's message, and you always need to keep a children's message." To which I said, "Yes, ma'am." And I always had. I had a dandy one for today, too. I can't believe those kids. For whatever reason, the welcome of the church and the challenge of the church and the opportunities of the church have worked their way into the passing of the peace, and they have gained a firm foothold. We get to meet our visitors during the passing of the peace. If communion is a heaven-to-earth ritual, then passing the peace may be an earth-to-heaven ritual. Viva voce! Long live the voice. Or word of mouth is defined as the passing of information from person to person by oral communication. We employ word of mouth when we share information or story. We employ word of mouth when we pass the peace. We employ word of mouth when we invite someone to follow Christ. Christ went to Galilee and he spied Philip. Now, Philip was from the town of Bethsaida, and it was also the place where Andrew and Simon came from. These were small communities in that area with 200 to 300 people in each one. They were fishing communities. So most likely everybody knew everybody else. And the young men, because they were in the same profession, were usually very well acquainted. Andrew, Simon Peter, and Philip all knew each other. Most likely, Andrew and Simon Peter had already stepped to Philip and told him about the wonder of meeting Jesus. In any case, Jesus walked up to Philip and, passing Christ's peace, simply said to him, "Follow me." Philip immediately ran looking for his friend, another young man named Nathanael. And when he found him, he exclaimed, "We," most likely meaning Andrew and Simon and himself, "we have found him about whom Moses and the law and the prophets wrote." But Nathanael heard only Philip's voice, and he replied, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Wow. But Philip didn't try to convince doubting Nathanael. Philip simply responded, "Come and see." And to Nathanael's credit, he did just as his friend asked. Jesus saw Nathanael coming just as he had seen Philip. And just as he spoke to Philip's heart, so Jesus touched Nathanael's heart when he said, "Ah, here is truly an Israelite in whom there is no deceit." Word of mouth. Taken off guard, all Nathanael could manage to sputter out were the words read in our hearing today. "Where did you get to know me? Where did you get to know me?" So many of us, when someone is too familiar or someone says something about our private lives, we think, well, he doesn't know me. How dare she presume to speak to me like that? Where did you get to know me? Jesus answered him, "I saw you sitting under a fig tree before Philip even talked to you." Nathanael realized that this man, Jesus, indeed knew him, knew all about him. As the 139th Psalm that we read earlier in the worship service today proclaimed, "Lord, you have searched me and known me." Employing word of mouth, the Holy Spirit, the peace of Christ was again cast. Doubting Nathanael completely changed his tune. He proclaimed, "Jesus, you are Rabbi, you are Son of God, you are the King of Israel." But Jesus told him, "My seeing you sitting under a tree, or sitting across the way under a tree, and yet knowing your thoughts and actions, that was no parlor trick. As you travel with me, as you learn of me, as you know me, as you grow in me, all of you will see the very gates of heaven open, and you will see the messengers of God ascending and descending and lighting on me. You will see the Holy Spirit sitting on the Son of Man." Unbeknownst to Philip, even as we engage with each other in conversation, even as we share the thoughts of our heart and the words of our mouth, even as we exchange information by word of mouth, ours are not the only thoughts. Ours are not the only voices participating in this conversation. Because we have confessed Christ, there is a Christ presence, a Christ power involved in all that we do. In another gospel, the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus said, "Where 2 or 3 are gathered, I am there too." It is God who hears our secret desires and works within us to transform them into realities. It is God who goes before us, and as we acknowledge Holy Presence, the very words of our mouth testify to God's presence and working. The very words of our mouth testify to God's presence. It is because of that presence, that holy presence, that ever-abiding Spirit, that we find we can begin difficult conversations that we couldn't begin before. We can speak truth to power. It was Afrikaner F.W. de Klerk who gave the order to release Mandela from prison, and that was his to do because he was president. But then by word of mouth, de Klerk and Mandela began the difficult conversation, which led to more difficult conversations as to how together they would lead South Africa. They came upon that brilliant plan where Mandela would become president and F.W. de Klerk, with all of his experience and governmental know-how, would become vice president. But Mandela paid tribute to religious presence in his inaugural speech as he and de Klerk planned together. He said that not just word of mouth between the two of them, but the presence of God made it possible for them to work out a plan for South Africa to end apartheid. Holy presence. At the time of his death, April 8, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was not a popular American. Many white people were tired of him. Many black people and other people of color were ashamed of him. Martin, you were fine when you represented yourself as a civil rights leader for black people. How dare you now presume to stick your nose in places where it doesn't belong? Stay in your lane, civil rights leader. Advocate for black people. Don't presume to speak on international issues like the Vietnam War. 1 year and 4 days before his death, which was April 4th, 1967, on that day was my youngest sister's 14th birthday. We sat in Dr. King's presence as he explained why his ministry and his mission led directly from the all-black Dexter Street Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama, all the way to the august Riverside Church in New York City. King spoke these words: "Beyond the calling of race or nation or creed is this vocation of sisterhood and brotherhood. And because I believe that the Father is deeply concerned, especially for his suffering and helpless and outcast children, I come here tonight to speak for them. This I believe to be the privilege and the burden of all of us who deem ourselves bound by allegiances and loyalties which are broader and deeper than nationalism and which go beyond our nation's self-defined goals and passions and positions. We are called to speak for the weak, for the voiceless, for the victims of our nation, and for those it calls enemy. For no document from human hands can make these humans any less our brothers and sisters. And as I ponder the madness of Vietnam and search within myself for ways to understand and respond in compassion, my mind goes constantly to the people of that peninsula. I speak not now of the soldiers of each side, not of the ideologies of the Liberation Front nor the junta in Saigon, but simply of the people who have been living under the curse of war for almost 3 continuous decades now. I think of them too because it is clear to me that there will be no meaningful solution there until some attempt is made to know them and to hear their broken cries. Until someone speaks up for them. The Reverend Dr. King, by his words, by word of mouth, called people to act compassionately for other people. As a nation of indigenous people, but mostly of immigrants, these are the words that we must refer to. These are the words we must recall and learn to speak, rather than the words of another who would suggest that fair-haired, light-eyed immigrants are preferable to dark-skinned, brown-skinned, and brown-eyed people. Those hateful, pejorative words deserve no heed. The physical circumstances of people in need don't matter, and prejudice never makes sense. Jesus calls us to, by word of mouth, regardless of any situation, invite others into community and to peace. They may argue, they may protest. Speaking to them through the Spirit, we can always raise our voice and simply say to them, "Come and see." We don't have to pick and choose whom we invite to Little White Chapel or whom we will not invite, thinking they won't fit in. This church is too liberal. This church is not liberal enough. You and I don't have to vet choir members or prospective church members to see if they will make the grade. She probably won't want to bring her children because our children's department is too small. Invite her. God may be calling her through you to make the children's department bigger. Oh, he may not like to worship here. She may not like our preacher's sermons. He wears red sneakers, you know. Don't you worry about that. Annabelle Lee didn't. She came down the aisle and looked at me, red sneakers and all, and said, "You need a children's message." We got her. As people of faith, employ your word of mouth to say, "Come and see."